session. Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will be under the theme of creativity across skills, co-creating communities of possibilities. We are hearing about learning and creativity and how we can co-create new ideas together with the use of technologies. So the speakers of these sessions are Dr. David Kong, Professor Mitchell Resnick, Chip Epstein, Dr. Pao Si Prasertsuk, a moderator who is the Innovation Department Manager from Bangkok Bank. So please give them a big round of applause and welcome Dr. David Kong on the stage.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes, wonderful. Well, it's such a huge, huge honor to be here. Again, my name is David Sun Kong. I'm the director of the Community Biotechnology Initiative at the Media Lab at MIT. I don't think Pat's in the room, but I just wanted to take a moment and just really acknowledge and thank Pat. So can we give a big round of applause and thank you to Pat for all of his visionary leadership, his creativity, and again, for being so vulnerable and sharing. I really appreciated his talk so much and it was very emotional as well. So again, thank you all so much for joining and being here. Today, our session is on cultivating creativity, but also across scales and in the context of communities. And so I want to start first by just acknowledging and thanking the many students and staff and researchers that I get to work with every day at the Media Lab. And today, my own background is in a field called synthetic biology. I'm wondering how many of you know what synthetic biology is. Can you raise your hands if you're familiar with this word? A few of you? So very simply, synthetic biology is an idea of using engineering frameworks to make the living world easier to engineer. So being able to apply metaphors like very well-defined and composable parts or abstraction hierarchies. These are things we use in engineering all the time, but mapping them to biological systems. And so when we think about creative communities in the context of synthetic biology, one of the big ways that I explore creativity and building communities is through teaching. So I teach a wonderful course at MIT called How to Grow Almost Anything. There's actually should be some audio as well with this slide. So this is a logo actually designed by Pat. So Pat is not only dinosaurs, but also woolly mammoth. And so one of the things we really do in this class is we teach young people and learners from all around the world all about the fundamentals of synthetic biology so that over the course, they can actually design and build and grow, quote unquote, almost anything related to synthetic biology. And so the students in the class learn about how to design DNA molecules, they learn about organism engineering, protein synthesis, how to culture cells, and all of these other wonderful techniques that are foundational to this field of synthetic biology and being able to grow and work with the living world. And so one of the things that we do in the class is we have a marvelous set of instructors. These are some of the leading synthetic biologists all around the world that help us teach the students a key skill every single week. And so that's really one of the key components about this idea is that we want to give young people and learners the ability to ultimately take skills so that they can express themselves creatively through biology as a living medium. And so this past year when we taught How to Grow Almost Anything, we had more than 300 MIT and Harvard students and global participants from all around the world participating in the course. And so we have our learners at MIT and Harvard, but then we also have a big virtual classroom as well. So I invite all of you to join us as a part of the course. We actually have some other students from Southeast Asia. I know Elaine took the course last year and also is going to help out as a TA this year. So it's very much a global mission. And again, when we think about creative engagement, as Mitch described so beautifully earlier, the 4 Ps, one of the big Ps is peers. We really believe, and this is very much part of our Media Lab ethos, in learning and working together in groups. And so in this case, with a virtual classroom, you're able to really engage with people all around the world that share a similar passion as you. And it's really inspiring, and I think for me also gives a lot of hope for the future and a lot of hope for the world. And so as a part of what we did in innovation for this course and really trying to increase the access and enabling even more diverse communities to participate, we really had to be creative during the pandemic. Obviously, we were in a situation where all of a sudden students and learners couldn't be in a physical wet lab anymore. They actually had to be at home, and even MIT students couldn't be in the lab. So one of the big things we explored was how can we use robotics as a way to actually enable students to program robots that could run life science experiments and synthetic biology experiments from anywhere in the world. And so there's a paper that just came out in Nature Biotechnology a couple of days ago on this topic, so I encourage you to read that if you're interested in learning more. And so we took our very wonderful curriculum and we figured out how to automate it. So this is one of our Opentrons robots, a low-cost liquid handling robot running some of the life science experiments that are designed by our students from anywhere in the world. And so all of our capabilities to run, for example, bioproduction experiments, really connected into this larger theme of what we're calling cloud biology, really being able to have a hybrid model for distance-based learning so that truly wherever you are, all you need is an internet connection and a computer, and you can actually program and work with us at MIT on synthetic biology in this wonderful learning environment. And so this is another one of our all-star TAs, Eyal, with our robots. And so as Mitch shared earlier as well, one of the things we really believe at the Media Lab is the idea of expressing yourself through projects. And so Pat shared this a little bit earlier, but this is one of his wonderful projects when he was a student at How to Grow Almost Anything. Again, trying to use living organisms as a way to produce molecules on demand that could be useful in space exploration. And as Pat shared, this is him in Zero G. And so one of the things that we love, too, is taking these ideas that might come from a course like How to Grow Almost Anything and figuring out how to turn them into theses, into publications, or sometimes even companies and new organizations that can come from these genesis of these ideas. One of the really kind of key themes that we have in the Media Lab is this idea of multidisciplinary work. The idea that there's a magic that happens when we bring together creative people from different types of disciplines and merge them and allow them to express themselves new in a creative way. So this is the work of one of our students, Laura Gonzalez, who's an architect. She'd never been in a wet lab before, but when she learned these synthetic biology skills, she applied synthetic biology to try to create large-scale architectural structures that would allow you to modulate the light in a different panel using engineered microorganisms. So again, an architect bringing synthetic biology into their creative discipline. And we see this with so many of the different final projects from our students. So again, we have textile artists and folks that are real masters at working with material science, incorporating biological and living materials into their projects that can now glow, respond to temperature, and other sensing. There's another great project, a collaboration between Miana, who's an electrical engineer, and Rosalie, who's a designer, to create a new fiber spinning system that allows them to actually use engineered organisms as a part of these new fibers. Another one of our students from Mexico, Gomi, had a wonderful idea to create a new type of organization that could create synthetic biology luxury goods to actually prevent animal poaching. So what if you could create fantastical new types of structures like a Tyrannosaurus rex tooth, just like Pat was describing with dinosaurs, but actually use synthetic biology to do that to try and prevent animal poaching. And so each year we have so many wonderful ideas from our students from all around the world and also at MIT and Harvard. And so I'd really love for you all to participate as well. All of you can participate and join in the class. We will release out a little application in a month or so. So please do stay on the lookout if you're interested in joining us. And so this is a really beautiful course for us. This is an example of one of our professors, George Church, his stem cells being actuated under experimental conditions designed by our students from around the world. And so this is a big part of our larger global education model, which really is about catalyzing a global movement around synthetic biology learning. So we can have a supercourse site at a place like MIT and Harvard, but then allow the diffusion of different types of nodes and sites around the world. And we would love to work and partner with you here in Thailand to set up a synthetic biology node here, for example. And so this, I think, is a part of a larger vision around movement building, right? Ultimately, we face so many big challenges in the world right now, and we really require global solutions that require all of us around the world connecting and working together. And so as a big part of when we think about scaling this work and thinking about global communities, another organizing movement that I'm a part of is called the Global Community Biology Movement. And so here, there are people setting up biology labs all around the world, very much like the Computer Clubhouse Network that Mitch helped to found, and also the digital fabrication laboratories that Professor Neil Gershenfeld founded at MIT. In a very similar way, there's a sprawling new network of these global community biology labs. And you'll notice this is a picture also of Pat. Pat came to the Media Lab in 2017. His first time coming to the Media Lab was actually for our event, the Bio Summit, where he was presenting about FreakLab, which is here in Thailand. And I had the opportunity to visit FreakLab a number of years ago. So for those of you that are here related to FreakLab, we're so excited that you're continuing your great work. And so the Bio Summit is a really special event, again, all about cultivating these communities around the world, specifically around the life sciences. And so we organize these events very much from a perspective of a movement style. So again, I'm very much a social justice activist, so I love this quote, "I'm leaving this conference feeling like everything is possible." We want you to feel powerful. We want you to feel like you can actually make a difference in these very challenging worlds. And so a big part of what we do is we have a very experiential event where young people and really learners from all around the world can come and have a direct experience of the life sciences and synthetic biology in our space. And even though we were in a virtual space, we still had a really marvelous global event, and we'll have another one coming up to this January. Another thing I want to mention briefly is leadership. So this is a really critical component when we think about scaling movements. You ultimately need leaders to really advance and cultivate communities all around the world. And so a number of years ago, we launched our Global Community Bio Fellows program, where we identified 36 leaders in the life sciences all around the world with an emphasis on the Global South. and had them go through a leadership training process. And we also co-designed together what we call a statement of shared purpose. So really trying to articulate, why are we all here? Why are we all passionate about the life sciences? So this is a little video of our fellows.
Madame.
Jumbo.
Bonjour.
Hi.
Hey.
Namaste.
Servus.
Vanakkam.
Привет.
Hey everyone. Hello.
Kekwanu.
Our shared purpose
is to fundamentally transform life sciences
And democratize
biotechnology
To inspire
creativity
and improve life.
By organizing life science
change makers
and by enthusiasts
To build
an inclusive global network.
cultivate an accessible commons of knowledge
and resources,
launch community labs
and projects
and enable local educators.
To go out to the bang, woo! I'm gonna play some funk music for you now.
So we really like to bring a lot of joy, a lot of kindness, and a lot of love into our work here with our global community. And a big part we think about in a very rigorous way is how to community co-design different types of artifacts. That statement of shared purpose is one, but another thing we've worked on is ethics. If we're talking about in synthetic biology, living organisms that really require a lot of care, a lot of safety and security to really work safely with. And so several years ago, we designed an ethics process to actually enable the discussions around how do we want to work and treat each other, and also how do we want to work with these living materials. And so we produced, again, another set of wonderful guidelines, and this is you can go to biosummit.org/ethics to learn more about this work. And so again, I invite you all to come join us at the BioSummit. This will be happening at the end of January. It'll be a hybrid event that's both online and also we're encouraging regional events as well. So please join us. You can apply there on the website shown. And I also want to share with you briefly a new project that we've been working on in collaboration with a wonderful conservation organization called Revive and Restore. Revive and Restore aims to use synthetic biology to work on conservation of keystone species in our ecosystems. So they've been really gotten a lot of press, for example, with working on trying to de-extinct the woolly mammoth, for example. And we're working with Revive and Restore to try to apply some of these code of ethics principles in thinking about specifically coral preservation. So for the oceans here are very important. I know here in Thailand as well, there's a very, very important issues around how do we preserve corals, which are so critical to our natural ecosystems. But one of the big challenges is how do you actually work with communities collectively to ultimately make decisions about how to deploy these very sophisticated synthetic biology technologies. If we want to try to introduce, for example, a coral probiotic into the wild, we actually need a process to bring these communities together so that we can make decisions. And so this is a big project we're working on with an ethics principle along with Revive and Restore. So any of you who are interested in coral preservation, please come and talk to me as well. And in conclusion, I'll share about another work with some local communities in the Boston area. So this is a picture of some students with a program we worked on called the Bridge Program, where we took young people throughout the greater Boston area. We had a wonderful STEM and STEAM curriculum, but we also worked together to create some music. So this is, again, a Media Lab combination of art and science, which is a very core principle for us. And so we thought to ourselves, what does this collection of microorganisms, there are trillions of microorganisms that are on the human body right now that help influence our mood, our cognition, what if we can make music from the different types of data that are part of this collective microbiome? So what does your microbiota sound like? And so what we did was we had the young people from this program go all around the city of Boston and swab different objects. So this could be, for example, their laptop at school, their blanket at home, et cetera. And then we had our partners, Ginkgo Bioworks, perform what's called metagenomic sequencing to read all of the DNA letters that we found in those samples. And then we used a series of algorithms to sonify that data to create music. Again, music is a universal language. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, your cultural background, all of us have a relationship with music. And so using music as a way to enable young people in particular to learn about the microbiome and all of these microorganisms for us was a really exciting prospect. And so these are pictures of some of the objects that the students all around the world, or the students in Boston, swabbed. And then this is the data that we got back from the metagenomic sequencing. And then I'll give you one example. So one of our students, Amy, she's an ice skater. And so Amy, these were the 6 most abundant organisms that we found on Amy's ice skate. And so this particular process that we use to generate the music involved taking highly abundant expressed proteins that we find in these organisms, and then we had a process we called codons to chords, looking at the protein sequence and translating them into different musical motifs. These could be different chords or different other ways of expressing yourself through music. And so we had an algorithmic process to generate these different musical motifs, and ultimately, if we listen to, for example, Jet Galacakis, this is what it sounds like from our algorithm and from our musical process. Can we get more volume, please? Even more volume would be great. And so ultimately, what this all sounds like together for Amy's ice skate, these are the 6 most abundant organisms and what the biota beat, or the musical microbiome of this ice skate sounds like. So here we go. And so what I'm going to play for you now is just the start of the video, what we call the Boston Biota Beat, the musical microbiome of Boston, where we ultimately, again, created a real musical symphony connected to the biological data that we found from these microorganisms. And if we could just get a little bit more volume, please. Thank you so much. So I'll stop there on the music, but again, I really hope you enjoyed that musical representation of the microbes that we see all throughout the city of Boston. So again, a really multidisciplinary team worked on creating that particular piece, and I'll leave you with a cat meme. So everybody, thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate you very much.
Actually, it's great following David, because I think the theme of my talk resonates with a lot of the ideas that David was talking about building movements. It's not just about developing one new technology or activity, but engaging with people around the world with shared interests and shared goals to be able to work together to bring about change in the world. So I'm talking about catalyzing a creative learning movement. And I want to spend time in this presentation to say, why do I think a creative learning movement is important? Then how is it that we can support it? So let me start with why. Why is it that I think creative learning is so important, and why do we need to support a movement? And I tried to capture it just in a little bit of description here. I think we can all agree that the world these days is beset with all types of disruptions and disconnections and disillusionment through a fast-changing and complex world. And because of that, today's children are going to face a constant stream of unknown and uncertain and unpredictable challenges in their lives. And because of that, just learning a specific set of skills or facts is not going to be the way that they're going to thrive in the future or be happy in the future. So the ability to think and act creatively will be more important than ever before. So that ability to think and act creatively will be important for individuals, for communities, for companies, for countries as a whole. And that's why we need a creative learning movement to really be able to deal with all the challenges of the way the world is working today. So how is it that we're able to support people developing as creative learners and creative thinkers? And as both David and I have talked about, we often rely on this idea of the 4 Ps of creative learning. To really support creative learning, how is it that we can support people work on projects based on their passions, in collaboration with peers, in a playful spirit? So I'm going to give a couple examples of how it is that we're trying to do that. First, with some technological tools that we're developing, and then with some networks and communities that we're working with to support these 4 Ps. So let me start with a technology that we've been working on for the last 20 years. It was actually 20 years ago this year that we started working on Scratch as a programming language to enable young people to create their own interactive stories and games and animations, and then share their creations with others in an online community. So right from the beginning, it wasn't just a tool for creating, but also a community for sharing. And it's been so satisfying for us that since Scratch launched in 2007, 15 years ago, it's grown all around the world, including here in Thailand and in every country around the world. And just recently, as David mentioned, we passed a milestone that there are now 100 million Scratchers around the world. That's 100 million people who have joined the Scratch website. And just to give, to pause a moment to think about the scale of that, that's greater than the population of Thailand. It's greater than the population of most of the countries in the area. So we have all these young people who are using this tool to be able to express themselves in new ways. But it's not just enough about learning the technology, but how can we help support them to share their ideas, to connect with one another, and to use this in a creative way. Let me show a couple of videos from a couple different countries around the world where young people are using Scratch and then talking about their experience and what they're getting from the experience. The first video clip is from South Africa.
Scratch is not like a computer language to me. It's more like my diary. I get to do my own story.
It's more about your imagination because there's no limit to it, so you can do mostly whatever you want.
So again, you can see from those words, it's not that they're talking about their technical skills they learned. I love that the young woman talks about how it's like her diary, the most personal thing you can have. So that's where you can express your ideas. She sees this as a way that she can express herself creatively. And the young man is talking about, how is it that, there's no limits. It's just open to your imagination. So you can use your imagination and curiosity to express whatever it is you have in mind and then share with others. Here's another example from India. And in this case, the young people are using Scratch to do projects related to challenges that they see in their local community. So they're trying to address problems they see and coming up with creative solutions for addressing those problems.
बच्चे अलग अलग तरीके से अलग अलग मॉडल्स बनाए उसमें एक बच्चे की एक सोच है वो कुछ जानवरों के बारे में बने कुछ स्कूल के बारे में
पानी में बहुत सारी आलूदगी फैल रही है इसको रोकने के लिए हमने एक छोटा सा एक्ट तैयार किया है
So again, seeing issues that they see in their local community like water being polluted and then using this as a way to express those ideas and to probe. You see kids doing simulations and making public service announcements to spread these ideas with one another and connecting with other kids online who share the same passions that they do so they can learn with and from one another. So it's been very satisfying for us to see how young people around the world have come together both to express themselves but then to join together to share ideas and to be able to connect with one another around the issues that they really care about. Another project that we've been just getting started on was inspired by the work on Scratch, but it's aimed specifically at mobile phones. Because with Scratch, you can create things on laptops and on desktops. We know that in many parts of the world, the only digital device that kids will have access to is a digital phone, a mobile phone, or it's the one they have most easy access to. And we want to make sure that all young people, in all cases, are able to use technologies to express themselves. So being able to let them use the phone in that way is so important. So we're working on a project. There's still a prototype. It's not out there yet. The current name is Octoplay. And with young people with access to phones these days, a lot of times they're using it just to watch videos or play games. We want them to be able to use this to express themselves creatively. So we see Octoplay as a tool that they can use, as you do in Scratch, to be able to create your own animated stories and share them with others, to be able to create, play, and share anytime, anywhere. Because one of the advantages of a phone is you can take it with you wherever. So as an example of that, you can see the little example running here is from using the prototype. This is a project that was created by a young girl who went to the beach with her mom, and she saw in the ocean, she saw a fish, and her favorite color was purple, and she said to her mom, I hope I see a purple fish. And her mom knew they weren't so likely to see a purple fish, but she said, you could create a purple fish with Octoplay, which the girl had used before. So she pulled out the phone, took a photo of the ocean, so she was pulling in what she was seeing into the phone, and they made an animation where the fish turns purple. And then sent a copy of it to her dad to show what she was doing at the beach. So again, it was a way to take the world, bring it into it, do something creative with it. And we want to make sure that all kids have that opportunity. She wasn't just doing this at a computer lab once a week in school, which is the way a lot of kids experience coding or technology. It was something that she could do anytime, anywhere. So again, kids are using this in personal ways. It's like here, a 9-year-old, the first time he used Octoplay, his uncle was having a birthday, so he made a birthday card to send to his uncle. Other kids use the sensors of the phone. We made programming blocks so you can connect with sensors the phones have, so you can take advantage of that. So like every phone has a tilt sensor, so there's now programming blocks that can tell how you're tilting the phone. So kids can make projects like this car game, where as you tilt the phone, it controls the car. And when you touch the car, it beeps. So again, whereas in the ocean example, you were taking the world and bringing it into your phone. Here you're taking the phone and putting it into your world, attaching it to a Frisbee, making a steering wheel, and creating things. Again, mixing the digital and the physical, which has been a theme throughout this conference. We see it shouldn't be something that just takes you into a different world, but connects to your current world. Of course, there are many other sensors of the phone. Here's another example that makes use of the magnet sensor on phones. Actually, I didn't realize that all phones have magnet sensors built in. But now we have a programming block. You can tell when a magnet is near the phone. Also, phones have flashlights. So in this case, it's using the magnet sensor to trigger the flashlight to turn on in a very creative way. So the magnet is on the heart. And the phone is underneath his shirt. And when the Octoplay project sees the magnet, it then turns on the flashlight and starts playing the music. So kids are using this to express themselves, but also to use the full capabilities of the phone in all different types of ways. As we've been developing this, we've been working with partners around the world. So again, we're localizing it. It's already in like a dozen different languages. Actually, we don't have Thai yet, so we can work with some people here to make sure that there's a Thai version. But of course, it requires more than just translating the blocks. We also are working with these partners around the world to make sure that it fits in with the interests and the culture and the local culture of kids around the world. So we're learning a lot as we're using the prototype. We have working with organizations who are trying out the prototype and bringing in different visual assets, giving us different music and different images to include in the app, and suggesting different types of sample projects to connect with local interests and local culture. Let me give a couple examples of how we're working with these different organizations, because that's the one other theme I want to emphasize. It's not just about the technology, but how we can connect with educational organizations to support creative learning with these technologies. So again, one initiative we're working on in Brazil, where one of my former graduate students, Leo Bird, is from Brazil, so he was really motivated to support creative learning in Brazil, and he helped start a network called the Brazilian Creative Learning Network. At first, we found a network of educators who were interested in these ideas, and we worked with them and had them share ideas with one another and to be able to connect with one another. And we got more and more educators in this network. They started holding different events, like they were called Festivals of Invention and Creativity, where they bring together educators and parents and kids to share ideas about how to use different types of technologies in creative ways. So it's not just about any one technology, but more about the idea of learning to express yourself creatively, in everything that you do. This started as a real grassroots effort. It was just a network of really dedicated educators who were very well aligned with this. But it became so popular, these festivals became bigger and bigger, that education ministers started noticing. So the Minister of Education for the state of São Paulo came and visited us, and he ended up including then and adding a creative learning course in the middle school curriculum. And then last spring, we had a workshop at the Media Lab with education ministers from 6 different states in Brazil who came together and actually did hands-on workshops to get a better understanding of this creative learning process, to think through how they could shift policies to support these types of activities in school. So in creating movements, it's important both to have a bottom-up, grassroots, but also to connect with people who can set the policies. So we're trying to do both. I'll give one more example just from my current trip. Before flying here to Thailand yesterday, I was in Korea for the past week, where we're working on an initiative called the Future Learning Collective. This is something that we're doing with the Smilegate Foundation there, who started a great makerspace. We were really inspired by their makerspace that supported all different types of creative making for kids. And we're now working together, not just to have their makerspace, but to connect with kids all over in order to support these types of creative activities. So they're running different workshops for kids using Octoplay and other technologies for doing things, but also running online courses for educators. There's an online course that they're doing that's inspired by a course we do at MIT called Learning Creative Learning. It's about how to learn about creative learning. So they're doing this online course that helps people learn, help educators get a better understanding of how they can support young people in the creative learning process. So I think those are just a couple examples from different parts of the world. But we see that in order to really support this type of global creative learning movement that we think is so important, we need to connect all across the world and connect with all types of different people. It's going to require connecting not just with educators, but also with parents and companies and policymakers. Because in order to start a movement, you need support in all those different ways. So I've had all of you, I'm sure, from many different backgrounds, but we need everybody to think about how you could get involved in creating little ripples of creative learning. Because I think if all of us create little ripples of creative learning, they'll add together into a wave of creative learning. And ultimately, over time, we'll establish a culture of creative learning that I think is going to be so important for today's young people to grow up to become fully active and engaged contributors and participants in tomorrow's fast-changing society. Thanks very much.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. All right, I'm Ziv. I'm a PhD student in the Human Dynamics group at MIT. And today I'm going to be talking about how we can empower creative communities with generative AI. So we live now in the heyday of generative models. New types of technology like generative AI are transforming creative practices. And we've seen this across the board. So from designers who are using generative AI to make new fashion designs, or imagining the future of furniture with ideas that maybe a human mind couldn't have come up with by themselves. More recently, we've seen text-to-image models like Stable Diffusion absolutely transforming the art world, and new large language models like ChatGPT are transforming the way that we interact with AI. And some of you might have played with ChatGPT in the last couple weeks. So these models are incredibly exciting and represent huge opportunities for creative, but they also raise some interesting questions. For one, will artificial intelligence replace human creativity or augment it? And a lot of people right now, artists and creators in particular, are terrified that AI will replace them, and instead will be relying on them for every form of creation. However, I don't think this is the case. And in this talk, I'm going to argue that AI is a powerful tool for ideation, brainstorming, and speculation. And when we're thinking about ideation, brainstorming, and speculation, bringing images to life is an important part of that. So we're going to talk about text-to-image models like Stable Diffusion. How does that work? For example, we start with text like this. For example, technology and art meet in Bangkok. You take that and feed it through one of these generative models, like Stable Diffusion, and out you get an image, like this one here. So with this form of technology, I'm going to talk about two case studies that we ran at the MIT Media Lab to explore the potential for this for creation. And those two case studies are on turning trash into treasure and co-imagining utopias. So first, turning trash into treasure at the MIT Media Lab. This took place at a community event we have called 99 Fridays. This is a repeating event at the Media Lab where the entire community comes together to basically hack and prototype over the course of a couple days and kind of go wild a little bit. And so, okay, how did this work? First, participants at this event would select 5 pieces of trash from a pile of random objects. Then, with a laptop, they would basically use Stable Diffusion, this generative AI system, to basically generate 3 images of what they might want to make with that trash. Then they used hot glue and tape to basically build a trash sculpture. kind of like the one you see here. So we were excited about how the generative AI system in this kind of form of creation helped inform and involve the human creators. And so here's what we learned. First, we learned that generated images informed sculptures, and people were interested in using the AI to help them in a creative task in the future. Second, we identified 2 different types of users. The first were people who had an idea in mind already. They had their trash, they were ready to go, and they used the AI to refine their idea. The second type of people did not have an idea in mind, and they used the AI to brainstorm possibilities. Interestingly enough, we found that participants were 44% more likely to find the generative AI helpful when they did not have an idea already. This suggests AI's possibility in helping us break through the paralysis of the blank page in creation. So we've found that people can use AI to be creative when making tangible things like sculptures. But how does that apply to different things that are maybe more abstract and consequential? In this next thing, I'm going to talk about another activity we ran, this time at a Solar Punk 99 Fridays. And basically, this is how it worked. So people would basically come to the event and would read the following prompt. How will we reimagine the following categories in Utopia? Team up with someone and pick one of the following sectors. And these could be sectors such as medicine, art, civil rights, engineering, economy, space, or trade, and brainstorm how the future could be better at their intersection. Pick up a leaf and write down your vision on it. Add any visual representations you want. Tape the leaf to a stalk, add a flower, and plant it in the Solar Punk garden. And here's kind of an example of what that Solar Punk garden with everyone's kind of visions of the most wacky ideas in the future might actually look like. So what were these visions? They were pretty interesting. Some of them were about dyeing the ocean purple to prevent global warming, or using holistic medicine as an art form. We took these visions, and then we fed it through the generative AI system and got images that look something like these. Kind of wild. We took the images and then showed them back to the people who had the ideas in the first place, and we were curious, how did that image work? Did it kind of help them in some way, or was it just what they already had in mind? And we found some interesting things. First, the images sparked new implementation ideas. For example, take this image here. The vision here was biophilic vertical gardens lining neighborhood streets or roads, creating function and beautiful public spaces. When we showed this image to the person who had that vision, they were pretty surprised that there were actually no pumps and tubes involved in that. That's what they were expecting when they were thinking about vertical gardens. So the insight there is that maybe natural features could be used to make the garden beautiful. Therefore, this actually helped them think through how their vision might be implemented in practice in the real world. We also found that the images prompted association with lateral concepts. So for example, take again the image of holistic traditional medicine as an art form. When we showed this image back to the person who had this idea, they were very intrigued by the emphasis on hands in the image. And this to them made them think about the importance of labor and the making process in holistic traditional medicine, something that they hadn't even really thought about before. On the other hand, take this image. Public spaces, solidarity building, the intersection of oceans and relationships, publicly accessible oceanic vistas. When the person saw this image, they were pretty surprised that if you look at it, it doesn't actually contain an ocean, despite the fact that the prompt contains the mention of the ocean twice. But the insight that they had was, while there wasn't an ocean, there were lots of people together in relationships. And this highlighted to them the importance of relationship building in organizing in public spaces. So, what we've seen here is how, with the lateral thinking, that it's actually the glitches in the AI that led to breakthroughs in creative thinking. In that way, it's maybe these visual indeterminacies that, maybe they're a feature, not a bug. Here's an example. So with this thing we had before, public spaces, solidarity building, the intersection of oceans and relationships, publicly accessible oceanic vistas. When we fed it through the model, this time it was VQGAN plus CLIP. This is the original image you saw here. Again, no oceans here, kind of a weird image. But ultimately, there's a lot of kind of really interesting things here that a creator might hook into and get inspired about the lateral ideas that this might suggest. When you compare this to the same exact prompt, but this time thrown into a different model, here DALL-E 2, which is known for being photorealistic, very high fidelity, indeed, you get an ocean. But what do you lose? Here you see that, yeah, you get what you might expect, but it's a little boring. It doesn't really kind of spark the same kind of creativity and imagination that the kind of weird, strange stuff that you get from VQGAN plus CLIP. So the only point here is that more high quality isn't really better when you're thinking about how these generative systems might be impactful for creators. After the workshop, we actually made a zine. We compiled all of the images and the visions together into a book that we basically shared with everyone in the Media Lab. The idea is to kind of spark a conversation about what are our shared values, what kind of futures, what kind of utopias do we want to build together, and how can AI be a part of that? So these things are very exciting, but the way AI is generated oftentimes introduces very new questions because it's so complicated. There's so many moving parts in the generative AI system. So there's a lot of questions, like who gets credit for AI-generated art? Is it the people who upload the data that these images are trained on? Is it the person typing things into Stable Diffusion? Or is it the AI itself, whatever that means? So to explore this question, you need to really think about what is AI and how do you think about it? And there's two kind of ways to do. The first is AI is a tool. And this is really like, it's something like Photoshop or a camera, kind of the next generation on a long lineage of creative tools that we've already seen. On the other hand, you might think about AI as an agent with its own intentions and goals. And depending on the way you think about it, it might change your answer to this question, who gets credit for AI-generated art? So to explore this, we ran a large randomized control study basically looking at how people allocated credit and responsibility to human creators when you basically change and manipulate whether the AI is framed as a tool or an agent. And in particular, we focused to allocations of credit and responsibility to 5 different actors. The first is the crowd. So these are the people who are uploading images that eventually these AI algorithms are trained on. The second is the technologist. These are the people who are programming and training the models that we all interact with. The third is the artist. This is the person who's actually prompting and interacting with the system directly. And then we also have the curators. This is the person who basically sees the image before it kind of goes out to the final world. And finally, kind of as a baseline, we also have the AI itself. Here we're calling it ELIZA in our vignette studies. And what I'm going to show you is 2 bars for each of these 5 actors. One that is orange, so this is how much responsibility people allocated to that actor when you conceive the AI as a tool. And also a blue bar for when you conceive the AI as an agent with goals and intentions. So what we see is that for the AI itself, that's ELIZA over there, we see that when you anthropomorphize or agentify the AI, people do indeed give it more responsibility for the creation. Similarly, people, when you anthropomorphize or agentify the AI, they give the technologist, the person who created the AI, more credit as well. However, and critically here, what you see is that when you agentify the AI, you actually reduce credit to the artist, the person who's actually kind of interacting with it in a tangible way. What this means is that the way we talk about AI matters. And we have to be careful because anthropomorphizing or thinking about the AI as an agent can actually undermine credit and responsibility to the humans who are directly interacting with it as an art form. So just to wrap up here, we found that AI can augment creativity by helping map out the possibility space. And this is medium agnostic. whatever your medium is, whether it's trash or imagining the future or something in between, AI can actually boost your creativity. And finally, we found that creativity isn't just a solo act. It can happen, and it actually happens best when it's in communities and organizations with an AI helping as a tool. Thanks so much.
Everyone. So it's absolute a pleasure and also pleasure to be here. I feel like I become student again. So today, this topic, the creativity across scale, is really relevant, timely, and really important for the current dynamic changing world due to the advancement of technology. I do believe designing the creative learning experience is one of its foundation. So I would like to start asking questions to Professor Mish. So we are inspired by your passion to catalyze a global creative the learning movement. What could we do to support this noble goal from where we stand? Professor Mish?
Yeah. When again, to support a creative learning movement, as I said, it's not just about getting the technology out there, although that can help, but also it's trying to shift mindsets for how people think about approaches to learning. Yeah. And helping people understand the why that this is important in the world. So going back to what I said at the beginning, we have to shift mindsets by helping people understand why it's important to be supporting creative learning. And that's a big effort. There's an advocacy effort to help people understand. But then also we need to take steps on the how. And as several of us mentioned, our Media Lab learning approach of projects, passion, peers, and play, I think is a good place to start. Whether you're a parent or an educator or a designer at a company making different types of products, I think as we work on things, whether we're developing a new technology or developing a new activity or developing a new space, we're always thinking, how can we design it so that it supports people work on projects based on their passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit. And we think if we get those 4 inputs right, then we will get good outputs. So we paid a lot of attention to those 4 inputs and how do we create spaces, tools, activities, and communities that are based on those 4 Ps.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor. So we can definitely see that these initiatives are beneficial and impactful. However, but how and can it be quantified? So my next question is, how do you measure the success or impact of the program?
Yeah. So again, those were like the inputs. But you're right that it's important to look at the outputs. How is it that it brings about change in the world? First of all, sometimes we say that the main point is not to try to quantify. Usually if you try to quantify the output, you end up missing important aspects. We see this all of the time, that certain things are easier to quantify than others. So what happens oftentimes, we end up valuing the things that are easily quantified, and we miss important aspects. Yeah. So it's fine to quantify certain things, but also be aware that we might be missing things. So first, we see that it's important to figure out what it is you value, and then figure out how it is that you can assess it. And it's not always quantitatively. There could be other ways. So we sometimes say we want to try to document the success, not quantitatively measure the success. So we're trying to have different ways of showing what it is. And one thing we often look for is we're not looking for who scores highest on a test. We often look for diversity as an important output. If we're concerned about creativity, diversity is one of the things that comes about. So if we're running a workshop, in fact, last week when I was in Korea, we ran a workshop, with young people using this Octoplay project. One thing that made me very happy, it was not the sophistication of the projects, but there were about 15 kids in the workshop, and the projects they worked on were very different from one another. So I saw it as a successful workshop. That's across a workshop. Or if I'm looking for the output of an individual learner, then I look for their diversity over time. If someone does an interesting project, but then they keep doing very similar things over time, I'm not going to be very satisfied. So I think we both need to develop tools and then to facilitate the ways we organize activities, so to encourage that type of diversity in what's created, either by different people or by the same person over time. So for me, that's one of the important ways of assessing the success.
Thank you for your advice. So now we moving to Dr. David. So your incredible work on how to grow almost anything can help everyone in the world with the access to state-of-the-art knowledge and also laboratory equipment. So this is really helpful. Therefore, I have two questions to you now. Please could you share with us some example that creativity make a difference in biology work? And also, do we need technical know-how to be creative in technical field of work like biology?
Yeah, those are great questions. And maybe to build a little bit on what Mitch was saying too about diversity, I think one thing that we see, and this is again very much part of the Media Lab ethos, when you take disciplines that are not normally associated with each other and explore that interface, so many magical things happen there, and you can really amplify the types of diversity that you see. And for me, one of the real great joys of this course, How to Grow Almost Anything, and again, I really hope you all do apply and join the class. We have a big virtual classroom, so we'd love for you all to participate. The magical things happen when you take these creatives, they might be artists or designers, people that have never been in a biology lab before, have never held a pipetter, and all of a sudden you give them a new skill. You give them a new capability that they didn't previously have, and then they're able to express themselves in a really unique way. And so for me, the types of projects, I highlighted a few of them in the talk, but we see so many designers, architects, even folks that come from like urban planning, for example. One of our students at the Media Lab, Andreas, is in the City Science group, and he had never taken a biology class like this before. And all of a sudden, after taking the course, he was reimagining cities that could use living organisms as a part of lighting and sensing, and he's built some really remarkable tools that you can imagine in a city landscape. So to me, I think that that ability of bringing together these disciplines that are not normally together allows for the expression and the amplification of the types of diversity that we see. So that, I think, is one critical aspect. The other part, you're talking about whether or not you need a skill beforehand, and the answer is no. I think, again, one of the things we think a lot about at the lab, too, and again, I've been so inspired by Mitch's work over the years, is really lowering the barriers of access, right? So you might think for many years doing computer science could be very, very difficult, but through programs like Scratch, all of a sudden, you can teach yourself and learn about programming in a very simple way that you might not have previously imagined. And I think similarly in the life sciences now, we're in a similar moment where there are many big barriers to getting into synthetic biology. Like engineering organisms is very, very difficult. It's complicated. But again, I highlighted this in my talk. The ability to work with software, the ability to work with robotics enables a type of distance learning that beforehand was really, really hard to come by. At MIT, again, we do a lot of work with the Open Learning Initiative and Institute at MIT, and we think a lot about distance learning, right? So right now in computer science, you could be anywhere in the world, and as long as you have a computer and a laptop, you can participate, you have access. And so I think what we're starting to see now, and what we've been really pioneering at the Media Lab, is a new way to combine computer science with biology in a way so you can actually use the same infrastructure that we have in computer science, but apply it to the life sciences. So now you can actually have a distance experience with a wet lab when previously you had to be in the lab, but now you actually don't anymore. And it's funny, I was inspired earlier by the previous session with on the Xverse, where you can imagine augmented reality, virtual reality, all of these different tools that allow you to actually play and be creative in the life sciences in a way without actually physically being in the lab, which I think is going to be a huge, huge part of how we learn both the life sciences and synthetic biology in the future.
Thank you for sharing with us. So this can inspire in people in other industry to establish their own creative environment and to generate the new idea and also to execute it. That's really helpful for us. Thank you. So Mr. Sif, your work on to bring the generative AI to empower creative community is really impressive. So I have two questions to you also. Actually, I have many questions to you because I... So the first one, how will generative AI impact our work in the future? What you show us, I can see many opportunity, also some question also as well. Will it reduce the need for human to be creative? That is the one question for you. And the next question, I would like to know also, could you please to share with us about the debate around generative AI, especially around ethics and plagiarism?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I really do believe that these generative AI systems represent a huge opportunity for transforming the way we work and create together. Even this morning, I was checking my Twitter feed and saw a new movie that someone had generated entirely with ChatGPT. They said, ChatGPT, generate a script for a movie with these certain parameters. And it just generated the entire script. And then you had all the characters. ChatGPT, what is this character wearing? It just generates everything. And so using these things, they were able to basically art direct an entire film that they actually finally recorded and made. And it was pretty good. And all of these things are kind of these new opportunities, whether you're in film or programming, it can generate code or images, you can do all of this. Across these media modalities, these new forms of technology, the generativity is really just off the scale. So I think no matter what you do, I think there's a lot of really interesting and exciting opportunities for integrating these new generative systems into the way we work and create. With that, though, I think the danger is not fearing that it's going to replace your job, but rather augment it. And we've seen with these other technologies how you're giving people new tools and new skills and abilities to interact with these systems to push their creativity even further. And going to this question about the kind of the bias and the ethics and plagiarism, that is actually kind of a big problem with these things. There's a long kind of range of these technologies. So for example, you can think about the history of photography as maybe an interesting analogy for generative AI. And when photography first came around in the late 1800s, people were terrified that this was the end of art, especially portraiture, and kind of painting these photorealistic images of people. That now you can just snap a picture and that's it. So where's the creativity a little bit? So people were terrified, and what it turns out is that photography didn't end up killing art or painting, but it actually just is a new medium with its own distinct affordances that actually push other art forms even further. So with painting, now that painters didn't feel constrained to kind of representing reality, they were able to go into abstractionism and kind of explore other frontiers. So you see how new mediums and new forms of technology are a new kind of playground to play and explore, but also can end up pushing other medias different. However, the key difference, kind of going back to the question, with the new systems is their use of training data. And this can be very scary because plagiarism and copying things and biased representations of reality are massive challenges that we as technologists and citizens really need to address. And a key challenge there is a lack of diversity. You might get homogenization of content with certain types of people represented or certain ideas represented, which creates a flywheel. We're just doomed to kind of recreate the problems of the past a little bit. So that's why I'm really excited about AI, not as the final output, just kind of letting it take the helm and just whatever it generates, but using it early in the creative stage as a tool for brainstorming and creativity, because then you might see the image and be like, you know what, that doesn't actually sit right with me. That might be copying, or I don't like that vision of the future. And those ideas are actually excellent, and that's exactly what you want, because then you're thinking about the kind of futures you do actually want. So I think using it in these ways are ways to mitigate some of these key problems around the bias and plagiarism of the technology. Thanks.
Thank you. So many insights here. So we understand that generative AI will revolutionize the future of work by giving people back in valuable time to do what that really matters. Thank you. So returning to Professor Mish for your might be last question, let's discuss the impact of the culture on creativity. For example, in some Asian cultures, children are rarely allowed to make their own decisions and are often limited by law and norms. Do you have any suggestion for the parent among our audience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think it's important to think about the effect of culture. I mean, one thing I've seen as we've worked around the world, all children everywhere start out with great curiosity and wanting to explore the world. But as they spend time in the world, whether with their families or in schools or in other parts of their lives, some of them are allowed to continue to expand and their explorations, and some are very constrained. And I think what we need to do is to figure out the right way to support all children to be able to continue and to nurture their natural curiosity. It doesn't mean that we should just stand back and say, oh, you're already curious, just go ahead and do it. Because just because you're naturally curious doesn't mean you know how to find out things that you're most interested in. You need support. So we have to figure out how to nurture that. And that's not always done. let me give a couple examples since you asked about here in Asia. I'll tell a couple stories from a trip I took a couple of years ago, this before the pandemic, to China. We were doing a variety of work and activities in China. As part of one of my trips, I met with the president of Tsinghua University in Beijing. And as many of you know, Tsinghua is like the premier technical university. It's sometimes called the MIT of China, or they might see MIT as the Tsinghua of the United States. But when I talked to the president, and obviously he was proud of all the accomplishments, but he said there was a real problem. And he described it in a way that I thought was really interesting. He said, so many of the students who came to Tsinghua have been very successful in high school. They knew how to do well in school. They knew how to get good grades. And they would come to Tsinghua, and they could continue to use those strategies to keep getting good grades in the courses there. He called them the A students. But he said, for the future of his society and culture, he said he needed to support a different type of student, to find them, to attract them to Tsinghua, and to support them. And he called them the X students. And what he meant by the X students, he says, where the A students are knowing how to follow the rules, the X students know how to come up with their own rules. Whereas the A students know how to follow existing strategies really well, the X students are always developing new strategies. And he said the future, not just for individuals to succeed, but for the overall culture to succeed, there needed to be more X students. So he said one of the main things he wanted to do as president of Tsinghua was to be able to attract more X students to Tsinghua and then to support them there so they were valued. To me, that was really important. I think it can just help people to understand that many people, whether it's parents or educators, are so focused on supporting A students. And it's important to recognize that's not necessarily the best path to success either for the students or for the society. So try to see how you can support and nurture the X students. And I'll tell one other story from the trip as well. It connects a little bit to, you asked an earlier question about how can we assess creative learning. And I'd given a talk in China, real similar to a talk I gave today. And one of the educators in the audience asked a question, which I'd heard oftentimes about, well, how is it we can assess creativity? And I think that's a good question. But then he added, he said, I think this is very important because we have to identify those students who are really creative and then focus our attention on them. And to me, that was exactly the wrong approach. It's not what I'd want to see. Because the point is not that some people have a creativity that you need to nurture. Rather, everybody has their capabilities, but they're going to flower in different ways. So it's not that everybody's going to have the same creativity, but it's important to assess creativity and to document creativity so you can help individual learners see how they can build on their strengths and continue to build on it over time so we can have many different people each exploring their own approach to creativity in their own ways. And the most creative things, as David mentioned before, is often people with somewhat different backgrounds and bringing their own creativity and then mixing together with people with different backgrounds and in different disciplines. That's where the greatest creativity is going to happen. So I think don't try to just say, how can we identify the best at something, but look carefully at everybody. Where is it that they're most interested in? Where is it that they can do it, and then help nurture them to develop their creativity, whether it's in art or in music or in the science or in math, no matter what it is, because they'll then be able to be an active contributor to a broader community of creators.
Well, thank you for your advice. So as a parent myself, I find it really useful and I am certain that our audience will apply it for their children as well. I can imagine that the educational system will change a lot in these coming years. So go to the Dr. David. It also is your last question. I think to developing something new is always challenging. And what are the challenges that you find in developing community and how to navigate them moving forward?
So can you say the last part again? Just about community?
Community, yeah, developing community because you're quite impressive community bio, community bio.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And again, I really appreciate Mitch's talk earlier and Ziv's as well on these larger kind of aspects of cultivating communities around all of these different activities. And community building is really hard. It can be very, very challenging. But again, I think going back to this idea of passion and what is your natural enthusiasm. If you think about everybody here in this room, all of you are here because you have some shared connection, some shared passion to be here. And so a really strong and powerful movement, I think, is able to articulate and make explicit values that may be implicit. So for all of us here in this room, probably everybody here has some passion for technology, some has some passion for innovation, some passion for creativity. And so being able to identify those threads that bring us together is really, really critical when we think about building big movements. Another key part that I mentioned earlier was around leadership. Again, I think all of you in your lives and in some capacity have some type of leadership role. Maybe it's within your family, maybe it's within your community, or even your organization. And so I think there's a real strategic goal in trying to cultivate leadership at whatever scale, in whatever type of organization or movement you may be trying to build. So that's another key part. Another thing I think for me too that matters a lot, and again, something I've always valued very much about Mitch and the work at Lifelong Kindergarten, there's something about authentic connection that's really, really valuable, right? And again, I'm not sure if Pat is here in the room. I always try to acknowledge Pat, but I appreciated so much how vulnerable he was in sharing with us earlier. And I think when you're able to open your heart and be vulnerable in a room and in a stage like this, for example, it gives other people permission so that they can be vulnerable in exchange. And all of a sudden, when you start lowering your guard and everybody starts sharing in a much more authentic way, you have a much deeper and more meaningful connection with each other, right? We've talked a lot today about this idea of humanity and human connection being really critical, that it's actually not about the technology, it's about that human connection. And I really believe that very deeply. And so when we look at very powerful movements that change the world, and you look at in the United States, for example, the civil rights movement, or all these very, very challenging movements, and right now globally we have climate justice, so many big issues around wealth inequality and so on. Being able to see past our differences and being able to find the common threads of humanity that really connect us together, that's what helps us to disintegrate these different boundaries. Because in a way, we are all one people. And one thing I'll say too, it's not just our human connections, it's also our connection with the natural world, right? We're one biosphere. And so, I talk about synthetic biology and the living world, but it's true. We're one life and one planet, and I think the ability for us to catalyze these larger feelings of connection, larger feelings of empathy and kindness among humanity, but also the natural world, is a big, big challenge, but I think it's something I'm very optimistic and believe we can do.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. David. So your work on to help everyone to execute the idea to reality is really critical for creativity across scale, definitely. So, Mr. Sif, I believe, and also everyone believes, generative AI definitely the next future. So the last question to you is, how will the generative AI will be evolving in the next decade? If you can share about your view and also the use case that coming out. Thank you.
Absolutely. So obviously, all the advancements of generative AI in the next decade, big question, lots of interesting things, happy to talk about it more. Given that I'm the last thing between you and lunch, I'm going to provide a very succinct answer, happy to talk about it more. For me, the critical thing that we need to think about and build when we think about these generative systems in the future is embedding more meaningful human control into them. So right now, when you interact with something like ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion, you're kind of just typing text into this portal and kind of sending it off into the gods with no idea of what is going to come back to you. And what that means is that it doesn't really center the creator, the person, as the responsibility and the kind of interestingness in it. So I think the key interesting there is to provide more fine-grained and meaningful human control, looking at a lot of the interfaces such as Scratch and others, where you can really build with modular components something that is very rich and generative and interesting. And when you have something like that, then not only does it kind of give creators more tools to kind of imagine what they want, but also it kind of really centers them as the creators and makes them excited about what these kind of futures are. And I think the key dangers and the key things we should be worried about are the other end of that spectrum, where we have full kind of autonomous systems with very little human input and human oversight. And I think those are the things where you'll get kind of weird behavior, we won't know how to kind of credit it, it kind of alienates human creators. So I think what we'll see and what I hope is we steer away from this kind of autonomization of generative AI and really center human creators in the middle with more meaningful human control. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sip. So it's fascinating. Just imagine the world where human and AI can work together hand in hand, like what we saw in the movies. So the time is up. So I would like to thank you, all the panelists again, for sharing with us your expertise and insight. We learned so much about the importance of creativity, the opportunity that it presents for us if we could scale it across industries and professions. Thank you once again. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pao Si Prasert Suk, for moderating this session. Creativity across skills, co-creating communities of possibilities. Let's have a few photo sessions. And also thanks to our panelists, Dr. David Kong, Professor Mitchell Resnick, Mr. Sip Epstein, and of course our moderator, Dr. Pao, for your contribution to this event. Now, ladies and gentlemen, after this session, we will have a lunch break. So please be back in this hall around 1:30 p.m. This break will help boost your energy for our session in the afternoon. Can we have another round of applause, please, for a moderator and also a panelist? Thank you so much. We still have a lot to learn from this forum, so as I mentioned, it's now time for your lunch break. You can grab your lunch on the second and the third floor of this building. And you can enjoy your lunch at any space available in this building, but I do recommend the first and the second floor. And just to remind you that food and drinks are not allowed in this hall, so please enjoy your lunch at the designated area. The next session after the break will be from one of our co-hosts who have made this event possible. We'll be talking about cyborg health. Not to be missed indeed. So please be back here at this hall around 1:30 p.m. Thank you.